Well, Pak Gita, very happy and privileged to have you with us this morning for a series that is being initiated by the Indonesia Economic Forum on game changers. What are game changers and who are the game changers, and what is game changing really mean from an Indonesian perspective? Yeah.
Well, game changing in my simple, interpretation would just be, doing things that would have been different from conventional wisdom, that hopefully would lead to positivity, if not greatness. And I do see an opportunity for Indonesia to game change itself. Not that it hasn't. I think in the last 74 years, ever since independence, Indonesia has been able to game change itself a few times. But right now, I think the bottom line is, you go figure, how many people out there in the rest of the world, in developed economies such as the US, Europe, or Japan, or even China, talk about Indonesia. Developed economies would rather talk about China and India more. But does that mean that we do not deserve to be part of the conversation? So we've got to think about how do we get to that point where people start talking about us, hopefully in a good way. And another metric to basically measure our being relevant in the world would be, to what extent are we actually open-minded? And open-mindedness can be defined by way of the number of, for example, international tourist arrivals that we would have gotten each year. Last year we got about 15 million international tourists, and Thailand would have gotten 40 million tourists. I like to think we have more places to visit. So that I think is a reflection of the degree to which we are open-minded, but it also reflects upon the degree to which we want to be open-minded. So there's a lot of game changing that needs to be done to get there, and one of the most fundamental area that we could touch upon is how we educate the young kids or the young generations to come, so that they could actually converse with each other, but also they could converse with the rest of the world, as to put Indonesia better on the map in a good way. That I think requires not just the ability to communicate, but the ability to understand the world, right? And understanding the world could also mean that, after that conversation that somebody from Indonesia would have from somebody from beyond Indonesia, that would put Indonesia in a place where we could actually be more productive. In the sense that we could play a big part in becoming an industrial giant, like what we might have seen in Europe a long time ago, the US quite a long time ago, and China recently. And I do see an opportunity for not only Indonesia, but the whole of Southeast Asia to, I think, play a big part in being or becoming an industrial base in scale. And that, I think, requires game-changing conversations within India.
Having said that, what would be Indonesia's narrative, going forward, right? Yes, today we are the third largest democracy in the world.
Correct.
Right? We have a young demographic population. We talk a lot about a demographic dividend. We talk about a rising middle class, right? But those are all, to my mind, more focused on consumption.
Sure.
We are as a market.
Sure.
But we're not really telling the world what we can give to the world.
Sure.
In terms of ideas, in terms of
Sure.
products, in terms of contributing to the global community.
Right. There's a trend historically that I call this the consumption paradox, or the paradox of consumption, whereby any nation, when it becomes significantly, if not overly consumptive, it tends to have less wherewithal to produce, right? And this is a great time for us to actually take part, if not take over, that industrialization that China has done in the last 30 to 40 years. Because we've got the scale, 265 million people, a large labor pool and all that. So the dilemma is that we are very consumptive. 55% of our economy is domestic consumption. While we know that, we've got to make sure that we've got to produce, not only for ourselves, but hopefully for the rest of the world. So I think people in social enterprise, private enterprise, and public enterprise, and even the academic domain, they've got to basically try to figure this out. How do we make sure that we do not fall victim or trapped in this paradox of consumption, that we are not going to be able to be productive, right? And I think we can do it. And the most fundamental thing that we can do is making sure that we enrich our educational capabilities. But we also, what's a mockery is that, what doesn't get mentioned a lot is how we can actually be sustainable, right? And if I talk to the younger generations nowadays, they very seldom talk about climate change, right? Yes, we want to be more productive, but usually becoming more productive means that we're going to be using more of the world's resources, which means more emission of carbon. So we've got to make sure that, we're going to make sure that Indonesia becomes a big part of the sustainability equation of the planet. We know this from 1850 until 2000, the planet consumed about 350 gigatons of carbon. But that same amount of carbon was consumed in a short period of 15 years only, from 2000 until 2015. And we know this by way of the Paris Accords. We're going to be able to consume between 2015 until 2030 probably about 500 gigatons of carbon. Then you go figure how much carbon is left underneath the surface of the planet. There's only enough, scientifically, for humanity to live in the next maybe 70 or 80 years from 2030, based on the rate of consumption between now and 2030. So that I think is going to complicate the equation a little bit, but this presents, I think, an opportunity and a challenge for the younger generation to start figuring out how we can live sustainably.